All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our session on supply chain resiliency and net zero carbon. My name is Meryl Gibbs. I'm an emerging industry leader here at Appian, covering ESG, sustainability, real estate, and business services. So we're seeing a growing interest in net zero carbon and sustainability here at Appian from our customers, from our partners, which is why we've been working with John Moore, who's a consultant in this space with decades of experience in engineering and as well as renewable technologies. He's been on the front lines working with customers to create plans to reduce their carbon impact and reach net zero. And he's got very passionate about both the technology and policy aspects of the space. Plus he's got a great British accent and dry sense of humor, so you guys are really gonna enjoy hearing from him today. All right.
It'll be hard to live up to that bill.
Anyway, John, I'll hand it over to you to talk to us about Executive Order 14030.
Thank you. So we're going to kick off just by doing a really fast review of why carbon is such a big issue at the moment, and why suddenly we're seeing this huge sort of heat in the market around this whole issue. And it's been coming a long time. I mean, I think there's a whole range of different pressures that are leading us to where we are. And at the heart of this is the science. So if you look at this is the CO2 in the atmosphere we've got. It ran at around 278, 280 parts per million for a very, very long time. And then it started to pick up when we discovered that, of course, you could really drive economic growth by burning stuff and creating energy as a way of boosting our quality of life and all the good things that have come from that. But by around the 1960s, scientists started to notice that this was having an impact on the atmosphere. And so started to monitor it, and this is the data that came about from that. And by the 90s, it was enough of an issue, and the science modeling was maturing enough that actually the United Nations came together and said, we need to try and do something about this because this could become quite a threat to the way we are living our lives. But this is a pretty slow process. By the time we get to the Paris Treaty in the sort of 2000s, then we've got to a point where pretty much all the nations around the world agreed that not only was this a threat and something needed to be done about it, but every country had to commit to take action. And last year, we had the Glasgow Summit, and at the Glasgow Summit, every country brought along their plans to say what they were going to do about it, so those could all be added up into the model to say, does this add up to enough? And of course it didn't. There was an inevitability about that. And everyone's gone away to try and work a bit harder and come back this year with slightly more aggressive plans. But it's worth noticing that on that period of time, if you look at that chart, not only have we yet to do anything to try and reduce the amount of carbon we're pumping into the atmosphere, but actually we're still accelerating. So we haven't even taken our foot off the gas pedal yet. So that's a slightly sobering background. But clearly, if you look at that chart and how long this has been known about as a problem, it's not the science that's driving what we're seeing in the market. If it was, we'd have done it decades ago. So I mean, the other thing which has been going on is public opinion. And we've had the school strike, we've had big demonstrations, we've had green parties getting elected. But again, I mean, this isn't the first time this has happened. We've had waves of sort of enthusiasm for the ecosystem that have come and they've gone with the economy and other changes, and then we have a banking crisis, and that distracts us. So I don't think it's really that we can say has been the trigger for the level of interest in the corporate world there is now. And actually, I think it comes down to economics. The thing that's changed fundamentally is over the last 5 or 10 years, corporations have realized that this has become a threat to their business models. And investors have come to realize this is a threat to the value of their investments. And so we've seen a very rapid growth in the drive to be able to assess the non-financial risks to businesses, and in particular, the carbon-related risks to businesses. And this has become a very key part of how investments are assessed, and it feeds through into the cost of capital now. And it's also driven through changes in regulation. So we've seen in Europe the rules have changed within the European markets around disclosure of financial related risk, and the SEC are consulting on this at the moment. We had a session talking about this yesterday, and there's inevitably debate going on about how much of this will get adopted and whether there'll be pushback and the legal challenges and so on. But actually there's quite a strong level of support from the corporate world, and I think we will see not just the sort of basic sort of scope 1, scope 2 emissions being regulated for, but actually moving into scope 3, which we'll talk about a bit more. But it's quite a major impact across business. And of course, government policy also reads into this. And in Europe, we're well ahead on this. We've already seen quite stringent government policies coming in. And in the US, they're catching up fast. And this is just a graphic from the Federal Sustainability Plan. It's worth having a look at this plan and catching up on some of the things that are being proposed. It's pretty radical. And it will have quite far-reaching impacts on different areas of industry. So taking all that together, the whole sector of industry and the corporate world and the world of finance are having to act on carbon and act across the ESG space. And I think what we wanted to talk about mostly today is one particular outworking of all of that change. And that's, it's really come from this executive order that President Biden signed last summer with some pretty radical provisions in it. And we're going to dive right down into one particular element of it, which is the proposed changes to the federal acquisition regulations. And I'm sure that sounds thrilling to you as it sounds thrilling to me. But trust me, it's quite an eye-opener when you dig into the language that's used. So we'll see how we go.
So John, how about you break down for us, what does this regulations, what do they really mean? How does it impact me as a business?
Okay, yeah, so Executive Order 14030, is that what we're calling it?
I think so.
There seems to be some debate about how we name it. But I mean, it's a big order. I mean, it's hundreds of pages of stuff about all sorts of things. And all I'm going to do is pick out one short paragraph in section 5B, is it? Yeah. And this relates to the way in which the federal government buys stuff. It's the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR. And what the executive order requires the federal acquisition to do is to put in place provisions that encourage the use of vendors that are more carbon friendly, if you like, more environment friendly. So what I want to do is just pick out some key terms and just one short paragraph. And a lot of it's in sort of code, really. Some of the words that are being used here, you need to unpack it and understand what the code means. So, where should we start?
How about you start at the top? What does it mean to publicly disclose greenhouse gas emissions?
Okay, so I mean, on the face of it, this is quite straightforward. It's saying you need to disclose your greenhouse gas emissions, but it's not saying that you need to disclose it to the government. It's not saying that you need to be measuring this and telling us what your impact is. It's saying you have to publicly disclose it. And actually, we're going to go, there's 3 provisions here which are additive. You have to do all 3. And the first is you've got to publicly disclose your greenhouse gas emissions. And when you look through the detail of this, they're talking about scope 1, 2, and 3. So is it worth just doing a quick recap on the scopes? There's a whole lot of jargon, obviously. Anything like this, it ends up generating loads of jargon. But so one of the really key bits of jargon to understand in carbon is scopes 1, 2, and 3. And broadly speaking, it's not too complicated looking at scopes 1 and 2. So scope 1 is greenhouse gas emissions that come directly from what you do. So in practice, what that actually means for most businesses is if you're using heating gas, that means you're burning gas on your premises and you're releasing carbon dioxide. If you have a company fleet, if you operate a company fleet, then there's exhaust emissions coming out of the fleet. And it's a bit more complicated. If you're in the oil and gas industry, then you've got fugitive methane. And if you're in the chemicals industry, who knows what other things you need to worry about. But for most businesses, it's just really, what's my gas bill? Scope 2 is also not too challenging because that's the indirect energy emissions, which is it's basically electricity. You buy electricity, and somewhere else, there's a power station that might be emitting or might not be emitting CO2. If your power's all coming from solar and wind and nuclear, then that's relatively small. But if it's all coming from coal-fired power stations, that's pretty big. And so that's a factor. The tricky one is Scope 3, because Scope 3 is the emissions that you acquire when you buy goods and services, all the upstream stuff, and downstream, it's the emissions that get emitted by people using your product. Now, this is the one that there is debate about, because it's quite challenging for a business to be able to account for all of this. And one of the things people argue about is, well, isn't the double counting? If I'm accounting for all the emissions from what I sell, and the person I'm selling to is accounting for the emissions from what they buy, isn't that double counting? And yes, to some extent it is, but that all comes out in the wash when you roll all this up. And the really key point about Scope 3 is it's driving behaviors. It's encouraging businesses to buy from low-carbon suppliers. It's encouraging businesses to decrease the carbon impact of what they sell. So in the automotive sector, we want them to be selling cars that are reasonably fuel efficient, but also are recyclable and have the end of life impact is reduced. And in order to drive that behavior, you need that. So Scope 1, 2, and 3, those are quite key. If we go back to where we were, I've lost my track now.
Yeah.
Catch me up, Meryl. Where are we?
No, you're good. I think it would just be great to dig in further into what it really means when it says climate-related financial risk.
Ah, yes. Now, this is in code. So climate-related financial risk, it's basically saying, what's the risk to your business from climate change? And the two parts of that. One is, if you've got all your factories and they're all somewhere in Miami near the beach, then one of the risks is they might be underwater in a few years' time. So there's a direct effect of that. If you've got it in some parts of the States, you run the risk that they might be burnt down in a forest fire. There are risks directly, as simple as that, to businesses from climate. But actually, mostly, it's a bit more subtle than that. It's things like, if you're a business that's got very high carbon impact, you could be at risk because your customer base is going to be wanting to try and find lower carbon solutions. So there's a whole process that's been developed for assessing the climate-related financial risk to a business. And that is under a thing called TCFD. And the way that they've phrased this FAR proposal, that's what they're talking about. You need to have a TCFD assessment of financial risk.
Okay, so they've got to assess the risks, and then they've also got to then set actual science-based targets to reduce their emissions.
And this is where it really gets quite tough, because we've been in a situation where quite a lot of businesses have measured their emissions and have reported on their emissions. But now they're saying, no, you've got to actually set a reduction target. And you'll notice, again, it's the code. They've said it's got to be a science-based reduction target. It's a slightly odd way of expressing it. And what they actually mean is it needs to be a reduction target that's created and audited and certified to the SBTI standard, the Science-Based Target Standard. And this is quite a stringent standard. We've had all the issues around greenwashing and companies purporting to be green but not really doing much about it. And all of the sort of environmental credentials are lived within marketing. Now, it all needs to live within finance, really, because it's a regulatory requirement and there needs to be a reduction plan that is achievable. And what the SBTI process does is it says, okay, you've said you'll be net zero by 2035. Show me how. Where's your plan? Is it achievable? If you deliver this plan, will it actually deliver those reductions? And if it won't, go away and think again. We're not going to certify you, and you won't qualify under this criteria until you get that work done. And that's quite a big challenge, because not only do you then need to set a target, but you will then be audited against your delivery. So suddenly it's not just a one-time deal, let's have a project, let's create a plan. it becomes something you've then got to track and manage and be able to report on in an auditable way.
And so this is saying this is applying to major vendors, supplying over $7.5 million
I think that's
to the government.
Right, yeah.
So I'm sure that would apply to many of our customers today. But what if that doesn't quite describe my organization? Will this still impact me somehow?
Well, I think this is where we're going to see really quite a big impact right the way through the sort of corporate world, because you might not be directly a supplier to the federal government that falls into that category, but your customer might be. And if your customer falls into that category and they've got to report on this, they're going to be turning around to you and saying, come on, you need to tell me what's the carbon impact of the goods and services I'm buying from you. So I think if we've got various slides here, we won't use them all, but this is the one that sort of illustrates this. Basically, there's going to be a cascade down through the supply chain. And these regulations, and this is true also of things like the SEC regulations, these are going to start impacting way beyond the direct businesses that are caught by the regulation or by the provisions, because it goes right the way down through the supply chain, and that's the impact of this Scope 3. Because Scope 3 is included, you need to know from your supply chain what the carbon impact is of what you're buying. And a lot of the supply chain is set up for doing this. In manufacturing, typically they're pretty mature and they'll know this stuff. But there's great swathes of the corporate world that are really only just coming to this, and they're going to have to play catch up pretty fast, I think.
So John, you've actually worked with companies, right, to set these net zero targets, keep them on track to actually meeting those goals.
Yep.
What have been some of the common roadblocks or hiccups that they have typically experienced?
It's difficult because it's so variable from sector to sector, and this is actually, this is recognised by the regulations, by government. Within these targets that are being set for achieving net zero, nations are saying we will achieve it by this date, and they're then going back home and saying, well, how am I going to do this? And they're dividing that out among different industries, and so it is going to be different for different industries. But it can be anything from, within the world of software, which is sort of where we're living here. It's very much about looking at your server providers, making sure they are decarbonising the electricity supply. And a lot of those sectors are being given quite aggressive targets because actually it's relatively easy to decarbonise electricity supply. It's more tricky to decarbonise travel. I guess there's quite a lot of travel going on in this world. So that's going to have to be solved. And I think, although we've all gone back into travel in a big way because suddenly the floodgates have opened, I think over the next few years we're going to have to retrench a little bit and become a bit more balanced about making use of some of the skills we acquired during lockdown and use some of those. So it's very variable from sector to sector.
And so can you think of any tools or technologies that might have been kind of helpful for your customers along that journey? And if there are people here today who are looking for tools of that sort, what capabilities should they be looking for?
Well, so that's a lovely subtle segue there, Meryl, into why. Now I'll tell you why you need Appian, of course. But no, I think it is genuinely the case that within this problem that business is facing, a lot of the way in which to manage that really comes down to digital systems. And if you think about the way that the carbon emissions the decisions are made that create carbon emissions in a business, it's got to run right the way down through the business. It's not enough for a business to say, we'll do some big stuff like we'll change all our light bulbs to LED and we'll change all of our heating systems to heat pumps. It's going to be the little stuff as well. It's going to be about working through carbon budgets, so people are setting decisions about what different areas of the business can afford to have in their carbon budget, and then tracking against that. And suddenly, you're deep into business processes, and it's an extra parameter.
And so what are the key takeaways you'd like our audience to walk away with today?
You took the words out of my mouth, Meryl. It's almost as if we'd rehearsed. So I guess the key things really, we're talking very specifically here about the impact on federal vendors. And federal vendors really need to start to prepare to be able to report on their emissions and also have plans to reduce them. time is short, we slightly skipped over it, but one of the kickers in that regulation is saying that in tenders that are submitted to the government, they will give preference to vendors with lower carbon impact. And that's the teeth in this. It's going to start impacting the decisions that are made by government on what to purchase. So that needs to happen now. We need to start implementing these changes to processes, and they've got to be supported by digital systems. I mean, I think I've sort of implied it a number of times during what we've been saying, but all of this is stuff that's going to have to be regulatorily compliant. It's going to have to be auditable. You're going to need to have traceability of your data set. And that's all stuff that, you're going down a digital route. The other key thing, I think, and it keeps coming up, and I felt very sort of validated when it came up in the keynote address yesterday, is this thing agility. Because any business that's sitting down today to design their processes around carbon is going to get it wrong. Because it is complicated, it is changing, it's evolving. So yeah, I think having the adaptability and the agility is absolutely key. And again, that's, I think, where low code really sort of scores all the points.
Great. So I want to make sure we take a couple minutes for questions. Mm-hmm. So we'll open up to the audience. I think we're going to have a mic that's going to be coming around. So what questions do you guys have? Josh? I think, yeah, let's see if we can get that mic over here. Tori, we good?
Down the front.
Can we come to Josh over here? Up here? Yeah, thanks.
So you briefly touched on the discussion around double counting. Mm-hmm. And said it would come up into the wash. My brain's not reconciling that.
Yeah, okay. So the way that the carbon accounting gets rolled up, and it happens within organizations as well, so you do it internally, is no different from, it happens in finance all the time. You get cross-taxation where you balance it out when you do the roll-up. And the same is true here. So an individual organization is going to report on its emissions in terms of direct emissions, imported emissions, and exported emissions, and it will be under pressure to reduce all of those. The exported emissions are somebody else's imported emissions. So when you build up that roll-up at a governmental level and look at how that looks at from a national situation, they eliminate those import-export roll-ups. And there was a lot of debate about this probably 15, 20 years ago in some of the early stages of trying to think about this. And very quickly it was established that it was essential for this Scope 3 to be part of the story, because without it, any organization that's got a slightly dirty operation could simply offboard it and just say, no, I'm no longer going to do this. I'm just going to buy it as a service from somebody else, and it's not my problem anymore. So it was pretty key, I think, to the way in which the system was made robust to have that ability to include those.
Tori, could we bring the mic here? Oh, perfect.
Thanks for the great presentation. My name is Nikki Shah, and I work with Tata Consultancy Services. My question is really, and I think this is making much more sense visually with complex processes. So my question really is, would there be a way for the process to map out visually the connections between a company and their suppliers and their emissions, either they're increasing or decreasing, so that all stakeholders can view it transparently? I think this might be an opportunity that might come out of this conference. Maybe I'm wrong.
I would say that all the things we've been seeing in the various presentations and this morning's presentation in the plenary session was a real example of that, about where you've got these complex systems with multiple interactions. That's really where the sort of low-code platform excels, and the ability to be able to make those multiple connections. Because it's going to get really complicated quite quickly. And the vendor management processes, if you're a procurement boss and you're trying to manage your vendors, it used to be quite simple. Once a year you'd ring them up and say, hey, you're not employing children, are you? Great, tick the box. No slaves, no, tick the box. We can say you're compliant. You've got your quality standards in place, that's fine. And it was a periodic thing. You just did it once a year maybe. Now, you're going to need to have a feed from them that's telling you what carbon they're supplying alongside their goods and services. And if it's a parts supply, then there's probably a carbon life cycle that goes with each component that you buy in, and it'll all fit within your ERP. If it's services, it might get slightly more complicated. But yeah, the vendor management's going to get quite challenging.
And I think we have time for one more.
Yeah, I have one more question. So,
Okay.
how is this? So, in terms of capturing this data for reporting, how is this data captured today at different levels?
How's the data captured?
From a reporting perspective, right?
Right. So in terms of the reporting standards, I mean, one of the slightly extraordinary things in this whole space is that all of the standards have evolved really quickly and with a very strong level of consensus. So actually the standards against how you capture the data, how you report it, how you convert activity into carbon, those have matured really quite quickly and are continuing to evolve. So what's happening is the standards are gradually getting deeper and deeper. So they're starting with a situation where they might say, you can take some relatively high-level assumptions to turn an activity into carbon, but then the next iteration of the standard goes down to the next level and says, no, you need a bit more of a build-up. We need to look in a bit more detail. So we're moving from, for example, a situation where you say, I've used some electricity. What's the grid average carbon impact of that electricity? And using a generic number, we've already moved to saying, no, you need to use the number for your grid. So depending on which state you operate in, that's going to be a very different number. And then we're now moving towards the thing where actually what you need is an API that tells you what the carbon impact was at the time you were using the electricity. And that's the next step. And we're already well down that in Europe. And the reason for needing that granularity is that drives behaviors. If you know that the carbon impact of electricity changes depending on time of day, you can act on it and say, okay, well, I've got this carbon-intensive process. How can I run that at a different time? Let's run it later in the day when it's lower carbon. So yeah.
I think we're at time, but thank you all so much for attending the session, and a big thank you to John.
Thank you.
For all the great information. Now, if this is a topic you're interested in, we still have more great content for you to see happening right after this. We've got the session with EDP Renewables. They've put a lot of this into practice. They're just around the corner in the Diplomat Ballroom. In addition to that, we have a lot of great partner solutions in this area. So you can go see a demo at Appsino's award-winning ESG solution. KPMG also has an ESG solution for asset management and commercial banking. And PwC has a Know Your Business Partner demo all at their booths. So thanks again, everyone, for your attendance.